Hi, good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending where you are. I'm Colin, and it's a real pleasure to be here today talking about our webinar looking at publishing in JAR, tips for advertising professionals. I am super excited to have two really accomplished speakers here with us to help out. First off, we've got Kim Saxton. She's a longtime senior associate editor at JAR with tons of experience. She also is a clinical professor of marketing now at SUNY Buffalo. Congratulations on your move.
Thank you.
And she has a wealth of experience working with industry and, of course, teaching at the graduate level as well, too. So thank you so much here for being here today, Kim.
I'm so excited to be here. This is a really important topic. I'm glad to share whatever ideas I can.
Thank you for being here. Yeah. And next up, we've got Scott McDonald as well, too. He's the CEO and president of the Advertising Research Foundation, which is obviously super important to JAR, given that JAR is owned by it. But more importantly, Scott has a ton of experience as well, too, working in industry, obviously, and also sees the academic side as well, too, since he's an adjunct professor at Columbia as well, too, I believe. Is that right?
I have been. I'm not
Oh, have been.
teaching.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. But no, that's awesome. Thank you for being here as well, too, Scott. Yeah.
My pleasure. Happy to speak to this subject.
Awesome. So we are very interested to go through and talk about this. And this has really come out from seeing experiences I think we've all had. We've been encouraging folks in industry to submit to JR, but sometimes it can be a very sort of different format, or it is a very different format that we see in terms of academic articles versus market research. And so we wanted to spend some time going through today and just talking more about what those differences are. And then also giving some tips and advice on how to make it more successful, make you more successful potentially when you go through and submit as well too, which we hope you do. So it's a very casual format today. We encourage you, if you've got questions, to please throw those in the chat at any point as we go throughout the webinar. And we'll basically be starting off and basically kind of round robining it as we go through and discuss these different topics. So first off, I can start off here, just what is JAR? So JAR is actually the oldest advertising journal. It's really kind of an exciting fun fact there. It was started by the ARF back in 1960, I believe. And the focus is really to help curate knowledge for the entire industry, right? And the goal here is to basically be able to share new knowledge, new applications, new methodologies people might have to help the whole practice basically be informed by science and to grow as a discipline. Anything you want to add in here, Scott, or?
No, just that, I mean, it's
Go ahead.
consistent very much with the founding goal of the Advertising Research Foundation, which is to further through science the application of marketing and advertising, and that is key word because science isn't just anything goes. It means replicability. It means attention to design. It means transparency about your methods, and willingness to revise your theory when you get new information that contradicts it. It's pretty critical. So everybody's got to have an open mind. It's absolutely essential to the process. So JAR is, I think, like in some ways, a high manifestation of the goals of the ARF.
Yeah, so what I was going to add is that, we have that quote, I know that 50% of my advertising is working. I just don't know which 50%. And while it's an old quote, I think from Wanamaker or somebody, 50 years ago, I feel like a lot of folks in the marketing world today feel that that's still true. And I feel like we have done so much work to understand what works when and why and how that, that we should be able to do better than 50% effectiveness. And that's kind of my goal, is like, how can I help get more knowledge disseminated so that we do better than 50% more uniformly?
I love that. Yeah. Other big one we wanted to just sort of bring up here is that what are the benefits of publishing in JAR? And I'm gonna, pass it to Scott here to kind of start us off in this discussion here, because I think there really are a host of different reasons why you might want to think about submitting to JAR, even if you're not an academic, even if you are somebody working in industry.
So a lot of the submissions to JAR that come from the practitioner side rather than the academic side, they're some of my very favorite pieces that get published, no offense to the academics, but they're rooted very much in real substantive business problems. And they often are occasioned by someone taking advantage of having a uniquely good data set. that can be used then to address broader industry-facing problems, what we call them, or theoretical problems. So, to take it from a conference presentation, which is often an earlier iteration of that work, to an academic journal like JAR is a way of kind of immortalizing it, of making it permanent. Conference presentations are evanescent. They kind of can evaporate. People hear it. It's interesting. They'll talk about it. We archive it all at the ARF, so it is retrievable. But when it gets published in the journal, it has more credibility because it's gone through this rigorous process of peer review. It's a pain to go through, because you're going to have these anonymous reviewers kind of picking apart and asking difficult questions and sometimes asking for revisions. And so there's hassle involved, but it's worthwhile because you end up with something that has much more credibility than just you saying it on a stage.
Well, and I wanted to add dissemination. I mean, I think the best part of your idea, I read every single issue of the JR. Of course, I have seen quite a few of the articles beforehand, so I know they're coming. But then I get to use them in my classroom. So I'm teaching the next generation of practitioners, like, don't start from scratch, start with what we already know. And, some of them sometimes need help too. And so then it's an opportunity long-term, maybe, to establish a reputation that leads to thought leadership and sales. Although we're going to talk about don't sell in your article. But just the opportunity for more people to have it and to expand our knowledge, I think can't be understated.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's great for, opening doors, I think. And I think definitely that credibility angle that you both mentioned as well, right? Having that, verification that comes from the peer review and comes from potentially having, other, co-authors as well too, help out and, add credibility as well. Awesome. So next up, we're going to talk about the difference between applied versus theory-focused research. Did you want to speak to this, Kim, or do you want me to jump in, or? Yeah.
I'm happy to start with it. So I think the issue is some of the most interesting things that are happening in marketing are happening in practice rather than, in basic research, because people are solving everyday problems and they're very creative and new ways to solve these problems. And so we definitely want to see the latest and greatest that's happening live in the field. But we also want to understand, like, why does this happen? It's not just enough that we found this data, but we can't really understand how to use these findings, again, unless we understand theoretically why this happened and how this happened, what that mechanism of action is. So the ideas do need to come from the applied, and we want to bring those practices, again, back into academia, back into the classroom, back into basic knowledge. But we also need to surround it with theory. And so we have these two different groups working on the same phenomenon from two different angles, and we want to make sure they get integrated so that we get a more holistic picture of what we actually know.
The big difference for me between like more applied or market research and theory focused research would be around like how specific it is, right? And so like the goal is, as Kim mentioned, is with more theory focused, or what we often see as like academic research, is we want to be able to generalize. So we want to be able to, abstract beyond just one specific brand or situation and get insights that we can sort of draw on and use across other areas as well. Whereas sometimes we'll see where more market research could be more focused on one certain context or one certain brand, and it may not necessarily have those insights that can apply more widely.
I would add also that to talk about it from the standpoint of building theory is to struggle really with the causal questions. Why, X causes Y, and what's the mechanism by which that happens? So it's implied in a lot of the things that we do within companies, but within the context of market research or solving a particular problem for a company, sometimes it doesn't matter as much to your boss as all of the details of why, or how it fits into a broader literature that struggles with these questions of how advertising works, or how it fits into a media ecosystem that's much more complex than it was a few years ago. That's all interesting, but the company cares about achieving some very specific decision. And that's fine, but a lot gets lost. And so part of what, and sometimes, in business, to say something is theoretical it's a reproach. And theory isn't esteemed in the same way that it is in the academy. I think it's very important where you have evidence that bears on, theory about how things work. It's really important to try to bring it forward, at least to engage with the theory, and particularly if you find something that's surprising, something that the aha insight that may really open a door to a whole new form of inquiry. I mean, I think that's really how we make progress as a profession. I think any of the people that work as insight analytic research professionals within companies need to pay attention to that professional development, because we're all in it for the long haul, our professionalism is our brand.
Well, I wanted to add that I have worked in industry, and I do a good deal of work with industry right now still. And one of the things I constantly try to do is to bring the theoretical side into the practical side as well. I mean, if I think back to, loyalty, we've been studying loyalty, for decades. Why shouldn't a company that's measuring loyalty not understand all of the theoretical perspectives and leverage those in their own research and their own assessment of their own programs? I mean, if we know things are truths and we know how they operate, then even practical stuff, it can, find value from the theoretical side. More recently, I've been doing some work in, diabetes and diabetes engagement with patients, which is really, really hard. It's a very difficult disease. And of course, we want to use things like, well, what is satisfaction with diabetes treatment? And there's scales and theories about this that would have an impact as to whether or not people engage with the app, right? And so you can't take these things in isolation. They actually are marry well together and can only benefit the organization more by understanding the bigger context of what's happening.
Yeah, and understanding the theory as well too, and those truths, like you mentioned, can also save us from reinventing the wheel, right? And having to go through and do, the same research over and over again to find the same insights. So,
well, that's especially important, I think, Colin, because increasingly we have converging spheres in the field of advertising and marketing. I mean, advertising and marketing themselves become far less separable than they were at times in the past. Advertising was very much just about communications. Now you've got, you've got a much more complex situation. Companies that used to be exclusively concerned with B2C are now finding that they also need to learn things from the B2B sector. If you've got Coca-Cola interested in customer lifetime value, they're really borrowing from a theory and a body of literature that wasn't that relevant to them 25 years ago. So, it's an advantage for the practitioner to be able to go learn from the theory in some what used to be adjacent field that isn't so adjacent anymore. It's really closer and closer to your business. So that's another motivation to just pay attention to it. Read the Journal of Advertising Research and similar kinds of works, just to think afresh about what you're doing in your area. You'd be surprised how applicable it can end up being.
Yeah, very true. And speaking of merging, so like the focus of JR really was we're trying to basically bridge those two worlds. We're trying to, answer questions that are important to industry and important to advertising and marketing professionals, but to also bring in all that theory that we have in, the literature, and also develop new theories so that we do have some more everlasting or overarching sort of ideas and concepts that can apply more widely. And so our goal really is about getting that generalized knowledge, right? So we're looking for insights and knowledge that can apply across multiple domains, right? As Scott mentioned earlier, we're looking for, unknown effects or new relationships or new things that haven't been seen before. Perhaps it's new insights into how or why, as Kim mentioned, right? That really is the heart of theory, how or why something works, right? Maybe it's a literature review that can be useful as well too, right? That, brings new insight or understanding into how something is operating or what we know about something. Or it could even be, and this is something that's important too, it could be that there's a new type of methodology, which is really important, right? I think Kim mentioned that earlier as well, right? That new methods and new ideas on how to do research can also be important, and that can be used more broadly and more widely as well.
That's a great list of where we want to create generalized knowledge. It's hard to add to. I think you hit on, 90% of the articles that we're going to see.
So starting off next, we'll talk about structuring the article in the kind of the standard format. So Kim, I'll let you start us off on this one. I know you've got a wealth of experience, helping authors, structure their articles.
Right. I have worked with dozens of practitioners who have had articles in the JR, and I see some common, challenges, which the first one is going to be a little bit less logical for people, but I think often practitioners have done a whole bunch of work and they're really excited about it and they want to share all of it. And what happens if you have 3,000 or 7,000 words is you cannot share all of it. Instead, they really need to boil it down and focus on where they can have the biggest impact. And that's really, as we said here, the first thing that you're going to do with any article is establish why this is an important question. And there's lots of ways to do that. But before you even do that, you need this literature review. And I think this is the place where the practitioners kind of struggle the most, is they've done something really cool and they sort of know where it fits, but they don't actually know all of the academic literature that sits around it. And when you don't know the literature, then you don't know the angle or the positioning for your paper. I mean, it's just like a brand. A brand has to be positioned. Your paper has to be positioned. People have to know, what are you looking at? And then why are you looking for it? And we put the why first, but the what is the critical thing. And I think this is where I see the biggest challenge. Sometimes the literature reviews that we get from practitioners are like 20 or 30 years old. And maybe that's when they started their practice or started something and it hasn't been updated. And, the theory is moving, research is moving. We've got a lot of academics all over the world who are trying to publish. So there's always new literature. And really nailing down, of all the things you've done, which part or parts are the most convincing of this is a phenomenon that people need to know about. And then the second place is methodology. And sometimes there's a challenge where, this is proprietary work. And so we want to hold some things back. And there is an approach to keeping a black box, but explaining the black box, because of that generalizability thing. Most of the reviewers are going to look at this and say, can we believe these results were true? And we need enough of the methodology to go, okay, I believe them. These results seem to have occurred for the reasons that they said. We're looking for confounding reasons for the results. And that then leads into the presenting the results. And believe it or not, the JR, most academic journals have a specific format, and maybe it's 3 or 4 different formats for how we like to see the data and how much of the data we want to see. We don't want to just see one bar chart with no error bars. We need to know, like, what all was tested, what all methodologies, what all results. Tell us the results that didn't work. That's okay. We can acknowledge not everybody has results that didn't work. And then finally putting that context around it. But really the crux of it is this literature review. Getting that right will lead to the better introduction and lead to the better discussion, and then also sets up what the methodology and results have to be. And as I said, the most common thing I see is there's just too much here. Like, focus in on just one thing, solve one question really well instead of trying to solve 3 questions moderately well.
Great overview.
Yeah.
Diving in a bit more, so I guess we've got here. Oh, did I miss one? No, speaking of the literature as well too, right? So as you mentioned, providing that thorough backdrop. What do we already know on that topic? And as you mentioned, Kim, right, like the related topics, like the whole idea with theory is, if an effect exists, it should be generalizable to other areas as well, right? Reasonably. And so you might be able to draw on other literatures, as you mentioned as well. And I think that the big one is you really emphasize there is, why do we need this, right? Is this something that we can already infer from existing literature, has already been shown, or is it something that's new and exciting and interesting? Yeah.
Yeah, Colin, I have a tip here. So some people aren't aware of Google Scholar. So you don't even have to go into like an academic database. You could go into Google Scholar and put the topic that you're looking at in as your search item, and you're going to see some papers. Take the most recent paper and go and look at the references and look at how many people have cited it, right? Or maybe it's a paper 10 years old. Look at who cited it. And now all of a sudden, you know what most of the literature is going to look like, and you'll at least have a pretty decent leg up. So you're probably going to have to read 6 to 10 papers. I mean, that's what we do as we get their abstracts, dig in. You might even get some measures that could be useful. You might even be able to compare your results, and so that could be helpful. But it can all be done out of a Google Scholar as a starting place.
That's a great suggestion. And it can take a while. It can be like, if I'm new in an area, I could be reading, tons of articles to go through and basically get a sense of what's already known. And that without knowing what's known, it's really difficult to then know what's exciting and what's new, right? So it's a very important first step. Yeah.
That's I think a big challenge very often at this stage of it, because following that literature back a little ways and suddenly you're like, oh my God, I'm in the zone of neuroscience, or I'm in a deep econometrics, and things that I might feel a little out of my depth in, and to actually absorb that literature takes a bit more work, depending upon the subject. They tend to be, in my experience, either often areas of psychology or often areas of economics, that it requires a bit of work and preparation. Yeah. I think it's useful to see whether you can enlist the help of an academic in one of those specializations as a co-author. Then that accelerates the process of getting familiar with the literature, but it also helps to tame it a bit if you're a practitioner inside a company wanting to move this forward.
I think that's a hugely helpful tip as well, and something that we definitely, I think all of us encourage, right? That if you're interested, having an academic help out can be a huge time saver, because they're already potentially familiar with literature already. Even if they're not, we're often because we've read so many, hundreds of articles, right? We're often faster going through and doing these kind of literature searches as well, which can make it, just a little bit easier, and obviously take the pressure off of you if you have other responsibilities and things going on, which I know is often the case. Yeah.
And we sometimes have research assistants who can be pretty good at literature review too.
That is definitely true. Yes. For methodology, anyone want to start us off on methodology, or?
I'm happy to tackle
Go for
this
it, yeah.
with you. Yeah. So, I mean, it really, like I said, is making it very clear exactly what was done. Every reviewer who's reading this paper is starting to think about what else could have caused the results other than what you said. Could it be the sample? I mean, so we need details on the sample. Could it be, the way the questions were asked? A lot of academic research works with multi-item scales. We don't see those as much with practitioners. Sometimes we're interested in, do you have manipulation checks, right? So you said it's because, this ad was more colorful or more creative. Okay, so did you test whether it's more colorful or more creative, right? So, and sometimes that's just 1 or 2 questions. It can be pretty simple to add, but just asking yourself, why could these results be happening for some other reason? And how do I convince somebody that in fact they're happening for the reason that I thought? And the stimuli and things like that don't have to be in the main paper. We can put things in appendices. But if you say because it had this closing argument, and then we need to see what the closing argument looked like. And also for replication. So somebody wants to pick this up, and I can tell you, I tried to replicate a study, and I reached out to the author and I said, can you give me the exact items in this? And this person had actually published at least 5 papers on the topic. And the answer was, no, I don't have that. I don't have that instrument anymore. It's like, you've published 5 papers and you can't put your hands on the instrument. I guess I can't replicate it, or was that actually the point, that you don't want it replicated? So we want to work on replication to make sure that the things we know for real, and we know across contexts.
Yeah, super important, right?
Yeah, I
Always
think-
are on the side of more. Yeah, sorry, Scott. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was saying, I think transparency is super important here, and it gets more difficult as the technology gets more complex. You know, with particularly now we're saying there are steps involved that can involve AI,
Right.
scraping unstructured data off of very diverse sort of large data streams. It can be very, very difficult to actually lay out all of the assumptions and steps in that. And again, a technical appendix is sometimes a very, very good idea. But this is often a real tripping point. Ideally, and I don't think JR requires this, some journals do now, to even get considered, you have to be able to kind of share your data with someone else to be able to see whether they can come up with the same result. Make sure you're not cherry picking, or pea harvesting, or doing other things on the edges of propriety in the service of an argument that you're trying to make. The main thing to remember is it's going to be a very skeptical audience to get through with a peer review. So be prepared to be as transparent as possible, up to and including, offering the data, cleaned of any identifying information, things that, are expected from the standpoint of privacy compliance, but radical transparency is your friend.
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't require that, but some authors do, put it on online repositories and make it available. And definitely from a science perspective, that's good, but it's not something we require at the moment, but definitely it's a good thing to think about. Yeah. For the results and discussion sections, so the results is really focused on going through and describing what exactly your tests found. So if you're running statistics, what did those show, right? What were the findings that you got from what it is you were actually going out and testing? Usually it's around hypotheses or things like that. Obviously slightly different for qualitative work. The discussion section, though, is where you go through and contextualize your findings. And you talk about, like, how do these findings more broadly affect what we know about advertising and marketing? And this is really where you try to get to that theoretical sort of contribution with that. And you're looking at also, like, the practical implications. What does this mean for the industry? What does it mean for people who are working in this space as well, too? One big tip I've got here is I would definitely encourage people to use, lots of tables and graphs and statistics, all that kind of stuff, to go through and showcase this. I think it just makes it easier for people to kind of go through and digest what is coming across in these sections, which can often sometimes be very meaty as well. Other suggestions, ideas, or comments on this as well?
Yeah, so traditionally, we want to see sample statistics, so we understand what the population is. And then, some people do prefer to see like a correlations matrix and descriptives of the data as a starting place, and then your actual statistical analysis, and not embedded necessarily in the article, but as Colin said, in tables so that they're easier to look at. Traditionally in the past, we had all the tables in the back so you could pull them off and look at them at the same time. Now we embed them more typically so that you can look at the tables directly yourself. I know myself, I usually look at the tables before I start reading the words. So then I form my own opinion of what I think the results are and then see if you match it. So that's probably pretty helpful. Colin, there's a question about, from a methodological point of view, what about using Bayesian statistical tools because of the critics of p-value interpretation? I don't know if the editorial board has a position on that. I can share what my thoughts are if you want.
Yeah, I don't have any specific ones on that either. I think we're really open to all methodologies as long as they're reasonable and appropriate. Kim, you feel free to share yours as well. Yeah.
I would say the same thing. The key is to actually test significance of some nature, so don't just report the facts, but show us that the facts are meaningful. I frequently see results in conference papers from practitioners, and I'm like, those numbers look awfully close. Are we sure that those are actually different? And also, are they meaningful, right? So sometimes I see some really small differences that I know in reality don't make an actual effect difference. I mean, I myself have had a huge data set where everything was statistically significant, but I would argue it wasn't very meaningful. So, we have to balance all of those issues and trying to decide, is the knowledge that this suggests real, true, and should I leverage it in the future because I can trust it?
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, we do see submissions sometimes and papers that are using Bayesian approaches. And I do think that it's an increasingly important part of the repertoire of researchers, partly because a lot of the most difficult things to measure aren't really available to us through some, all-seeing, universe study that, so we're dealing with different data sets that we know have particular biases that we need to correct for to try to put
Right.
things together in particularly in the areas of media measurement right now. So with Bayesian approaches, though, you have to justify your priors. And so this goes back again to, an aspect of a literature review, but it's also kind of a layer of disclosure that you've got to include as to why it is that you're making certain prior assumptions to handicap the data that you've got, and adjust your model accordingly. And I think it very much should be welcome in the papers taking those approaches should be welcome at JAR, because it's not all Gaussian.
As long as it's reasonable and it's explained, totally fine. Yeah. All right, some additional tips as well too. We've got a bunch here. Anyone want to start us off on this, or?
Well, I kind of mentioned it before. I mean, you are selling your ideas and you can leverage the JR publication in your sales, but don't sell in the paper. I mean, let the facts speak for themselves, and wherever, possible, unblack box things, or if you have a black box, describe the black box so we can all go, okay, there's a black box right there. And all around this black box, we understand what happened. So I think that is really important, so don't not sell, just don't sell your services in the article.
Yeah, sometimes we'll see submissions where it's very apparent that they're pushing for a particular product or promoting a certain product, and that is not quite the right focus here. Here, it's really about the ideas, and if you happen to be testing it or happen to be using a certain product or context to find that, that's cool. But the main thing is really like, what is that larger sort of idea or larger sort of finding that you've got that could be applicable more broadly. We also wanted to highlight this. We've got two different article formats. We have the full-length traditional articles, which are 7,000 words, excluding references and web appendices. These are more for like the in-depth sort of articles where you go through, you have some sort of a fact that you're looking at. Typically, you're trying to explain the how or why, if it is that you're looking to build theory. And then also typically you're going to go through and have multiple studies, not always, but often we'll see multiple studies going through in those articles. We also have a newer format that came out, I think 2 years ago, which is research notes. These are 3,500 words. They're a lot shorter, punchier articles. These ones are more about preliminary findings. So maybe you have an effect, but you can't 100% explain why, right? And you don't really know why, and you haven't tested that. Or maybe you have something cool and interesting you want to get out there to be able to help other researchers build on your effects or build on your findings, but there isn't like the full package yet. There isn't the full sort of set of information you might have around that article. And so this is another sort of format that can be really kind of interesting to think about is, perhaps your insights are better set as a research note to stimulate more research in the future and to kind of get those findings out there.
Just a word of caution, writing a 3,500 word paper is much harder than a 7,000 word paper. So you have to be very thoughtful about the positioning and not trying to put too much in, because you just run out of space trying to describe what you did.
I'll build on the sales pitch point a bit, and practitioners submitting, and this applies really for conference papers as well as JAR. The easiest way for someone to dismiss out of hand what you're saying is if they think you are selling from a point of view that is kind of part of your institutional affiliation. And it's not just research companies that are guilty of this. I mean, it can be any company, and certainly any media company that is, technically on the sell side and the advertising, and it could be social media, it could be a broadcast network, it could be a magazine, it could be, any sector. People will be looking for a bias that's reflected from that. It's going to be up there on the, author and affiliation. Oh, he works for Nielsen. Oh, she works for NBCU. What's the point of view that I need to be protecting my evaluation or filtering my evaluation through? So it just makes the theory and embedding your argument in an underlying theory that's not owned by your company, but that's part of a literature, all the more essential to making a convincing case and getting people to pay attention to your results. The other thing I would add here that's not on the slide is that sometimes people think that because it's an academic journal, you have to write in really obtuse English, that you need to use really dull but big words. And it's really not the case, because you're still trying to reach, in the Journal of Advertising Research, you are trying to reach a business audience as well as an academic audience. So go back to Strunk and White, active verbs, no passive voice, no jargon, and business is filled with jargon. There's like, so many terms that just get cycled over and over and over and over again, and you don't need them. You can say it more concretely and more specifically and more vividly just by thinking about basic principles of writing in standard English. So please do that.
Yeah, I think my two pet peeves are sentences that start with as blankety blank in some year and blankety blank in another year found, blah, 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 blah. I mean, instead, flip it around. We know that this effect occurs, and then put the people in parentheses after the effect to tell us what it is. Don't tell us who found it. The other thing I would say along those same lines is, I think sometimes when people write for academics, they write these very long sentences, and
Yeah.
it's, I mean, writing is kind of like a song, right? Like you can have short and long and medium, and sometimes you need a comma, and sometimes you just chop it up, but like vary it so that it's actually fun to read.
Yeah, simpler is definitely always better, and definitely appreciated by reviewers as well too. Yeah. Some other additional tips as well too. If you're unsure about an idea and whether or not it's a good fit for JR, feel free to reach out. Reach out. You're welcome to reach out to me or any of the associate editors. We're all listed on the website as well too. And just reach out and ask if this is something that you think is a good fit for JAR. And we'll be very transparent with you on that. We don't want you wasting time on something that may not be successful. That said, if we do encourage you, it doesn't mean it's guaranteed, but we just think it might be potentially interesting once reviewers see it and get their feedback on it. Another huge piece of advice would be to take a look at previous issues and articles just to kind of see the style of articles. That can be a really effective thing to kind of see, like, how do people present stuff, right? And maybe you might find a paper or article that basically is very similar to the approach that you want to take. And you can kind of almost copy their format or style of how they go through and structure it and how they kind of present what it is they're going through as well.
Oh,
We spoke.
jump in
Yeah, go
on
ahead.
that.
Go for it. Yeah.
And just say that also, it's not a bad idea to cite some JR articles in your references. So reviewing the past issues might be very useful for you. Might find something that's very helpful in your literature review.
That's true. That is very true as well too. Yeah. And then the final one as well too, that we've got listed here is this again, that suggestion to partner with academic co-authors. I think there's a wealth of benefits that come from that. Obviously, as we spoke about earlier, was saving time with the literature review, thinking about the positioning as well, like Kim mentioned as well. And also just I think there can be potentially more credibility that comes from that as well. Because as Scott mentioned, right, when people look at the authors, if they see that all of the authors are from a certain institution or a certain company, right, they might come into it with that perspective that potentially this work is biased. Hopefully it's not, but they might have that view, right? And sometimes having academic co-authors can help legitimate some of the findings as well too, and just give a bit more sense of rigor there.
But
Anything else to add?
I
Go
want
ahead,
to
sorry.
clarify that the
Yeah.
reviewers don't know that everybody's from one
Correct.
institution. The reviewers are blind to who it is, but it's after it's published when the discounting then starts from other folks. Colin, there's another question in the question answer, which is there's a lot of debate about how old the articles should be, and do we do something systematic? How old, if like something like AI, how old can the articles be? So I don't know if you want to address that or you want me to.
I'm happy to go either way. Do you want to start off or sure?
Sure. I mean, there's been a lot of research for, 50 years, 60 years. So, I mean, no one is expecting you to go all the way back to the beginning of time. But we have punctuated ideas. So like in the 70s we found, in the 90s we found, in the 2000s, if all of your references are more than 10 years old, that's when people start to doubt. We feel like, maybe someone did this 10 years ago and they don't realize like the train is still moving and there's new things being known. And even with AI, I mean, to be honest with you, I took a class in artificial intelligence at MIT back in 1983. So we have actually been talking about AI for a long time. How we used AI has changed dramatically. So yeah, even in the last decade, we've done a lot to innovate machine learning and how we leverage modeling and explore patterns and latent models and all kinds of things. So I think your literature should be relevant to the results that have been found.
Yeah, I think that's all very true. Yeah. Another way of thinking about it as well too with the references is the references when referencing somebody, you're referencing the idea or the insight that they found, right? And so if you think about it as this body of knowledge that's growing over time, right? When people reference an older article, they're referencing what that particular article found, right? And as Kim mentioned, right, like if there's been stuff that's happened since then, those new insights need to be referenced as well too, right? And so if you're referencing a recent article, you're referencing the new insights that that particular article has, right? But if there's older stuff that has been already established, or is already known, you want to be referencing those articles that find those particular things as well too. Another way of thinking about it could be like a metaphor, the metaphor it's a conversation. That is, as a whole practice, we're having a conversation and we're just mentioning or citing the people who have, added important pieces to that conversation on a certain topic. Cool. Any other tips or advice on submitting?
I might just add in that, I think both in the setup of a paper and in the conclusions, it's an opportunity to really be pithy and focused about why someone in business should care. It's a little bit at odds in some ways with the theoretical argument, because that's all fine, but sometimes, as I said before, businesses might not care about the theory, but you can help them understand why they might need to be interested in it. And so, at least some part of your language, both in the setup and in the conclusion, should really try to remember that there is a business readership of this article as well. And don't make them guess as to why this is important, why this will help them make money, save money, be smarter, understand their consumers better, whatever it is.
Waste less money.
Yeah.
More often waste less money.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. And as we just kind of move to like Q&A, I guess two things I want to mention. One is that I think an article doesn't have to be perfect when it first comes in. And I think Kim could definitely attest to this. Like articles can do a lot of like changing as they go through the review process. usually for the better, which is good. So I think as long as you have an interesting idea, you've got interesting data, or something you're looking at, it's truly intriguing. People will usually work with you as reviewers and AEs to help improve your paper. So please don't be put off if you're like, afraid it has to be completely perfect at the beginning. There definitely is room to improve it as it goes through. I also want to plug as well too, this is a recent editorial, and this is really sort of like what helped lead to this webinar in the June issue, is looking at some these tips we talked about, right? And so there's some that I kind of discuss in there. So if you're looking for like a written version of this, you can use this QR code. You can also email me. I'm happy to email it to you as well. But just sort of like some tips, sort of discussing what we've gone through today as well too. And with that, I wanted to open up just if there's any questions anyone might have at this particular point. Or any additional tips Scott and Kim may want to offer as well too. Yeah. I think the biggest one for me, I think the number one thing I would suggest is like definitely taking a look at JR articles just to kind of get a sense of what they look like and better understand, the most recent couple issues. If you're an ARF member company, you definitely have access to it as well too, right? And you can reach out either to me or, the contact you've got at the ARF, and they can help get you access if you're not sure who has access in your organization.
Yeah, I
That,
like the tip of looking at previous articles just to get a flow and outline. I mean, mimicking, is the greatest form of flattery, but also it's a lot easier than starting with a blank page.
and sort of going back to the earlier conversation about why it's worth going through all the bother of submitting to JAR. I'll also just say that, the journal is covered closely by the trade press. And so, getting it there, if you want to kind of share or advance an argument about how to do things, or an argument about how advertising works, or how marketing works, this is an opportunity to kind of, it's like being on a stage, whatever adrenaline comes through with the thrill of standing up and making an argument in front of an audience. It's the same thing, but at a different level, and again, a good way of calling attention to something you think deserves that.
So Colin, this all sounds terribly difficult. Can you help the audience understand the role of generative AI in writing a JR article?
I think that's a really good question. I think generative AI is super exciting. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and I find it very interesting. I think that probably the two biggest uses of it right now would be for copy editing. I think it definitely can help make writing clearer and make it perhaps more readable as well too, especially people who may not have English as their first language. It's definitely useful for that. I think it's also really useful for potentially creating stimuli. I've been doing some work on that as well too, for how it can help, create experimental stimuli and things like that. I would definitely caution against using it for literature review, just because of the fact that, well, I guess two reasons. One is there's a hallucination problem. I guess everybody's, probably familiar with, where you're going to get references that are not accurate. But the second one is that generative AI tends to kind of give you sort of an average answer, right? And so it's very difficult to basically, I think, have generative AI come up with like really interesting insights, really interesting questions, because it's by definition kind of looking what's already done, right? And so I haven't seen a lot of success, both from people who I've talked to who've used it, or from trying it myself from that perspective. But I'm curious as to what both of your experiences are with generative AI and writing. Yeah.
Well, this is something we've been studying a lot over the last 2 years at the ARF. I don't think any of that has made it into the journal yet, but we have been publishing, and for our members, very detailed reports where we're testing the large language models. And the first thing I'd say is that it's all changing enough to where, like, whatever we say 1 month is likely to be a little different a month or two later on. But I would definitely agree, Colin, that our assessment is that the ability to master a literature is not really there yet. It's partly that the models don't have access to it. They also tend to be echo chambers. So if someone publishes something that then gets picked up by a lot of press and repeated over and over again, it's the same piece of evidence, but amplified out. And the large language models tend to sort of treat it as, a more robust finding than it might be. They tend to be better at sweeping and categorizing. If you think about it from the standpoint of content analysis, good old fashioned content analysis, they're better at developing the categories and pretty bad at counting the frequencies. And that's sure to change, but it supports your caution about relying on them too much for that phase of the work at this point.
Well, and I think a lot of the large language models are built off of what's published on the internet, and we know a lot of the academic research is not published there, so it's not very visible. And then in addition, we've had this influx of research mills, you know, where there are websites that are just spitting out and spewing results that, you know, as you said, one piece, you know, my last piece has got, you know, 50 of these things, and my first piece had 2. You know, that doesn't mean my first piece wasn't a better piece or more important in this topic. It's not as visible. It's kind of like, I think about, like, do we think that shark attacks are on the rise, or do we think that the sharing of news of shark attacks is on the rise? And it's the latter. And the same thing is true for earthquakes and volcanoes. Is we're not having more earthquakes and volcanoes, we're just sharing the news more. And I think that same thing's happening in generative AI.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And especially, I would definitely caution, I think more junior researchers as well too, just because I think that, and there's a lot of research showing that, people who are more experts actually get more benefit from generative AI because of the fact that they can better assess the quality. And like, there's that inverted U, right? People who are new may not have the skills or expertise to know when it's wrong. And that can be especially deadly as well, because we don't necessarily know when we're not getting good quality back from it. Cool. Well, I think on that note, I want to thank everybody for attending. I want to thank people who are watching later as well, too. That's totally great. And we love to have more views on our YouTube channel. And more importantly, I want to thank both Kim and Scott for coming and sharing their expertise and their experiences and helping to encourage everybody to submit to JAR.
Yeah, can't wait to read your articles as I send them out for review.
Yeah, and I'll thank you, Colin, for writing the article, because I think it's terrific and will be helpful to folks. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, both of you, and have a great rest of your day.
Great.
All right,
Ciao.
bye-bye.
Bye.